The night air in Alaska sliced through my jacket like a blade sharp and merciless. The fire we'd built had burned down to embers, tiny red eyes staring back at me from the ash. I could still see my daughter's outline against the glow of the Jeep headlights. Her face looked pale, almost waxen framed by her black hood. She was 34, strong, beautiful, and in that moment, a stranger. "You wanted peace, Mom," she said, voice calm in a way that froze me more than the wind. "Then let the bears give it to you." The words hit me harder than the cold. I blinked, trying to understand if she was joking, if this was another one of her cruel jabs meant to sting, but not scar. But there was no laughter, no hint of warmth in her eyes, only calculation. I took a step toward her boots, sinking into snow, my breath a trembling cloud between us. "Vanessa, what are you talking about? Come on, it's freezing. Let's get back in the car." She tilted her head like someone studying an insect. "You always loved your little survival shows, right? Time to try it out for real." The Jeep's engine roared, and I felt the ground shake under the tires as she backed away. The headlights washed over the trees behind me, turning the forest into a wall of ghosts. My pulse thudded in my ears. "Vanessa, stop this!" "You can't!" My voice was swallowed by the wind and the grinding of wheels. The vehicle paused, her face half lit, half shadow. "You always said nature heals," she said. "Let it heal you for good." Then she drove off. The red taillights bled into the darkness until they vanished. Silence followed, thick, unnatural, almost alive. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there, arms trembling, my breath coming in ragged bursts. I was 63 years old. I had worked my entire life as a nurse, patched up soldiers, soothed strangers' pain, buried my husband, and raised this child on my own. And now, that same child had left me to die. My knees buckled. I dropped beside the ashes of our campfire, the heat barely enough to warm my palms. I looked at the empty space where her tent had been, the tire tracks leading down the path and the shadows closing in from the trees. A low growl drifted from somewhere beyond the ridge. Bears. Real ones. The kind I used to watch on documentaries safe behind a screen. The forest stretched out like a test, ancient and merciless. I felt something shift inside me, not panic, not despair, but a hard click of instinct. The same one that had kept me alive in every ER night shift, every hurricane evacuation, every heartbreak. Survival. I pulled my scarf tight, scanning the ground for tools, anything. She had taken almost everything, the food, the GPS, even my lighter. But she'd left one thing behind, my old silver mirror, a keepsake from her childhood backpack. It caught the moonlight when I picked it up, flashing once like a signal flare. Maybe fate had left me a clue. Maybe it was my turn to fight back. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard her car fading into the night tires crunching over ice. I whispered to the darkness, voice shaking but steady. "You wanted me to meet the bears, Vanessa, fine. I'll meet them, but when you come home, you'll find I'm already waiting." The cold bit into my fingers, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going to die in these woods. Not here, not like this. The forest could test me. It could break me. But it would also remember me. My daughter thought she buried me in silence. She had no idea silence was where I learned to fight. 3 months before that night in Alaska, my life had been quiet, almost too quiet. I'd retired from the hospital after 38 years as a nurse, mostly in trauma and emergency. My hands had healed hundreds of wounds, but none of that training could prepare me for the wound my own daughter would leave in me. I lived in a modest one-story home outside Seattle, surrounded by the smell of pine and the soft hum of rain against the roof. My days followed a rhythm: coffee at 6 Radio News and volunteering at the local community clinic twice a week. After my husband Charles passed from pancreatic cancer 12 years ago, my life became a series of small duties meant to keep me from thinking too long about loneliness. Vanessa had been my purpose, my reason to keep breathing. When she was a girl, she'd cling to my arm, eyes wide with trust, always asking questions about the world. I remember teaching her how to patch up a scrape, how to stay calm during storms. "You're stronger than you think," I used to tell her. I believed it then. But as she grew older, something between us began to crack. She became distant, restless, embarrassed by my simplicity. She hated my thrift store sweaters, my old sedan, the way I said grace before meals. "Mom, you live like it's still 1985, she once said, rolling her eyes across the dinner table. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. It cut deeper than she knew. I wanted her to see that discipline, hard work, sacrifice, all of that had built the life she took for granted. When she lost her teaching job last year, I stepped in immediately, paid her rent, covered her student loan interest. I even refinanced the house to help with her credit card debt. She called it a loan, but no repayment ever came. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Every mother hopes their child will find their footing. But the truth was, she'd stopped trying. Her texts turned cold transactional. "Need $300 for car insurance. Rent's due early this month. You said you'd help." Always demands, never gratitude. Each message felt like another thread unraveling between us. When I tried to talk about responsibility, she'd snap. "You act like money's the only way to show love." But wasn't that what I'd been doing all her life? After Charles died, I had nothing left but my paycheck and a promise to make sure she'd never struggle the way I did. Maybe I went too far. Maybe guilt became my language of love. One Sunday afternoon, I stopped by her apartment with groceries and found the door open. She was sitting on the couch, laptop on her knees, talking to someone on speakerphone. "She's almost done. The house is paid off. It's just a matter of time." The words stopped me cold. "Who are you talking about?" I asked, stepping into the doorway. She froze, then closed the laptop quickly. "Mom." "Don't sneak up on me like that." Her voice was tight, defensive. I laughed nervously. "I didn't mean to. I brought you some fruit. You sounded busy." She brushed it off. "Just work stuff." But her eyes flickered with something sharp, something calculating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her words replaying in my head. "It's just a matter of time." The next few weeks, she avoided me, canceled dinners, ignored calls. When she finally reached out, her tone was different. Sweet, practiced. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said over the phone. "We should do something together. You always talked about going camping again, right? Just us, like old times." My heart leapt. For years, I'd prayed for this, a real chance to reconnect, to mend whatever had broken. She talked about Denali National Park, about fresh air and time away from screens. "I'll plan everything," she said brightly. "You just pack warm clothes." I cried after hanging up, overwhelmed with hope. Maybe this was it, the moment where years of distance would dissolve in shared laughter and open skies. I spent the next week preparing like a woman going to meet her own past. I dug out my old camping gear, cleaned the thermos Charles used to carry on our trips, even packed the worn photo of the three of us by a campfire years ago. I didn't see the warning signs, the small inconsistencies, her sudden cheerfulness, her insistence on handling all the logistics. When I offered to book the tickets, she laughed. "Mom, relax. I got it covered." The night before our flight, she texted, "Can't wait to make new memories." I didn't know those memories would nearly end my life. Looking back now, I realize love blinded me. I mistook guilt for generosity, hope for trust. And in doing so, I raised a woman who believed taking was easier than giving and control was the same as care. I had no idea the next time I saw her eyes reflect the firelight, it would be as she left me to die under the northern stars. The morning of the trip began with the smell of rain and coffee. Seattle's sky hung low gray as old pewter, and for the first time in years, I felt a flutter of excitement. Vanessa arrived right on time, wearing a crisp parka and new hiking boots. She looked radiant, confident, like the daughter I used to know before life turned her hard. "Ready, Mom?" she asked, leaning in for a hug that felt rehearsed but still warm. I let myself believe in it. I wanted to. At 63, hope is both a strength and a weakness. "I packed sandwiches, your asthma meds, and that cocoa mix you like I said." She smiled without looking up from her phone. "You're still over preparing." I said I got it. Her tone wasn't cruel, just impatient, like she'd already outgrown me again. We drove to the airport in silence, broken only by the hum of wipers and an old Luther Vandross song on the radio. For a moment, she sang along softly, and I saw my little girl again, the one who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I dared to imagine this trip would fix us. The flight to Anchorage took 3.5 hours. Vanessa talked most of the way about adventure new beginnings and resetting old energy. She said she'd found a trail less traveled, a quiet spot where no one would bother us. No tourists. Just peace, she said, and her smile made me ache with nostalgia. When we landed, the air hit like a blade, thin, clean, wild. Snow dusted the ground and the mountains rose like cathedral walls. "This place feels alive," I whispered. "Yeah," she said, eyes glinting. "It's real out here." We rented a Jeep and drove north for hours. The road, narrowed pine trees pressing close sky, fading from pale blue to the bruised purple of evening. Vanessa kept checking her phone, murmuring to herself. Once I thought I heard her say yes by tonight. When I asked who she was talking to, she smiled. "A friend who hikes." "Don't worry, Mom." But worry was my nature. I watched her hands tighten on the steering wheel, white-knuckled, and something in her silence made me uneasy. Around sunset, we stopped for gas in a small town called Cantwell. A ranger in uniform was there, tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that reminded me of Charles. His name tag read Noah Blake. He noticed our out-of-state plates. "You ladies heading into Denali this late?" he asked, voice firm but polite. Vanessa flashed a charming smile. "Yeah, just a short camping trip. My mom's an expert ex-military nurse." I laughed nervously. "Not that kind of expert." He studied us for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Be careful. This year's been bad for grizzlies. They're hungry early." Vanessa shrugged it off. "We'll be fine. We like adventure." But I caught the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when he turned away, as if he'd interfered with something she didn't want disrupted. Back on the road, she said, "You always attract the cautious ones. The world's not out to get you, Mom." I smiled, but my chest felt tight. "There's a difference between fear and wisdom." "You call it wisdom," she muttered. "I call it control." That word, control, hung between us like a shadow. I didn't realize then it would become the heart of everything that followed. When we reached the park entrance, the ranger station was closing. Vanessa signed our trail permit while I admired a display of old maps and animal tracks. The clerk said, "Not many folks choose that route this early in the season." Vanessa replied, "That's the point." She turned to me with a grin. "Ready to make memories, Mom?" I nodded, clutching the straps of my backpack. I didn't know that by morning the memories she meant would be the kind you don't survive. The next morning, Denali unfolded around us like another world. The horizon was white and endless, and the air smelled of frost and pine resin. The sun barely peeked over the peaks, painting everything in cold gold. Vanessa was all energy, snapping pictures, adjusting her jacket, pretending to be carefree. I wanted to match her lightness, but something in her eyes unsettled me, a brightness too forced, too practiced. We stopped at the visitor center where a ranger offered trail guides and bear safety pamphlets. "You'll want to stick to the marked paths," he said. "March, weather turns quick." Vanessa waved off the warning with a polished smile. "We'll be fine. My mom's tough." I felt the ranger's glance linger on me, reading my age, the gray hair under my cap, the stiffness in my posture. "Tough doesn't help much against a hungry grizzly," he said evenly. "Be sure you carry spray." I thanked him and took 2 cans, but Vanessa rolled her eyes as soon as we stepped outside. "You're not seriously buying into that paranoia, right?" she said. "We're not tourists from Florida." "No," I said softly. "We're a nurse and an unemployed teacher lost in Alaska." She didn't laugh. The drive deeper into the park grew quiet. Trees swallowed the road and snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Every mile took us further from signal bars and human voices. Vanessa hummed to herself an old song from her teenage years, but it sounded eerie in the empty wilderness. I tried to make conversation. "Do you remember when your father took us camping at Mount Rainier? You got so scared of the raccoons you hid inside my sleeping bag." For a second her lips curved, but then the moment vanished. "Yeah, well, Dad always made everything fun. You made it structured." I looked out the window, swallowing the ache. "Structure kept us alive, Vanessa, and it killed the fun," she replied flatly. The silence that followed was heavier than the clouds above us. Around noon, we reached a narrow pull-off where a faded wooden sign read Trailhead, Bear Creek Route. Vanessa parked and hopped out before I could object. "This is it. Private quiet, perfect." She began unloading gear efficient and quick. I noticed how new everything was: the tent, the backpack, the boots. It didn't feel like a casual trip. It felt like a performance. I carried my bag, slowly watching her movements. She looked so determined, so sure of herself. For a flicker of a second, I wanted to believe she'd brought me here to heal something. "You okay, Mom?" she called. "You're looking at me like I'm a stranger." I forced a smile. "Just admiring how prepared you are." "Guess I learned from the best," she said, but her tone carried a strange edge: admiration twisted with resentment. We hiked 2 miles in near silence until we found a clearing near a frozen creek. The ground was hard, but Vanessa declared it perfect. "Flat open safe," she said, pitching her tent beside mine. I made a small fire while she scrolled through her phone. "No signal," she muttered. "Guess it's just us." "Isn't that what you wanted?" I asked. She didn't answer. That evening we sat by the fire, eating from the tin cans I'd packed. The flames crackled, painting her face in amber and shadow. She stared into the fire, lost in thought. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Your life." "Staying small. Being the good nurse, the good wife, the good mother." Her words carried no curiosity, only accusation. "I didn't stay small," I said quietly. "I stayed steady." "Same thing." She smiled faintly, cruelly. "I just don't want to end up like you, depending on someone to survive." The wind shifted, blowing smoke between us. "You've never depended on anyone," I said. "Not really." "Oh, I have," she said. "I just learned what happens when you depend on the wrong person." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and something in that look made my stomach tighten. For the first time, I sensed it, not anger, but intent. The forest behind her felt suddenly alive, listening. Later that night, when she zipped her tent shut, I sat awake by the fire, staring into the darkness. The wood popped, sparks leapt, and I thought of Charles's voice telling me, "Trust your gut, Lyd. If something feels wrong, it is." I should have listened then, because everything about that night whispered one thing: danger. The second morning arrived, wrapped in fog so dense it felt like breathing through cotton. I woke to the sound of fabric snapping in the wind. Vanessa was already outside, dismantling her tent with brisk mechanical precision. "We're moving deeper," she said when she noticed me watching. "The ranger said storms might hit this ridge." Her voice was steady, but her eyes avoided mine. Something in her posture had changed overnight, all warmth replaced by restless energy. I nodded and started to fold my own gear, careful with each strap, each buckle. "You could have woken me," I said gently. "We're supposed to work as a team." She gave a short laugh. "You always did like to be in charge. I figured I'd give you a break." It was meant as a joke, but the tone twisted it. My heart tensed the way it used to during a code blue in the ER when everyone's moving, but something invisible says this isn't right. The path narrowed as we hiked south toward a ridge called Bear Creek Pass. The ground was slick from melting snow, and every sound, the snap of a twig, the caw of a crow, felt amplified. "How far are we going?" I asked after an hour. "Far enough," she said without looking back. Her voice carried easily through the trees, light and carefree, but every instinct told me she was holding something back. I tried to close the distance between us, but she kept her pace just fast enough to stay a few feet ahead. The old ache in my knee started to throb. "Vanessa, slow down." She turned, her face shadowed by the hood. "You'll be fine. You're the strong one, remember?" The words should have comforted me. They didn't. By the time we stopped, we were miles from the trailhead. The fog had thinned into a silvery haze, sunlight trying to pierce through. "This is good," Vanessa said, surveying the clearing. "Quiet, private. We'll stay here tonight." She unpacked quickly, setting up her tent in silence. I gathered firewood, pretending not to notice that she'd kept the bear spray in her own pack, not mine. When I asked for it, she smiled. "You don't need it, Mom. You've got instincts." That evening, as dusk bled into night, we sat by the fire again. She roasted a marshmallow, absently, eyes on the flames. "You know," she began, voice soft, "people always tell me I look like you." "You do," I said. "You have my eyes." She glanced up. "No, Mom, I have your mistakes." The wind picked up whistling through the branches. I stared at her, unsure what to say. You gave up your life for Dad, for me, for everyone but yourself. You call that love, but it's control, Mom. You needed to be needed, and I'm done being your project. Her words came like needles, each one finding its mark. That's not fair, I whispered. Fair, she said, almost laughing. You think life's fair. You think working yourself into the ground for people who don't notice makes you noble. She leaned forward, her face lit orange by the fire. You think if you keep giving, you'll earn forgiveness, but all you've done is build a cage for both of us. I felt my throat close. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, she said quietly. You've always known. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the crackle of firewood, only her breathing calm, even deliberate. Finally, she stood brushing dirt from her knees. I'm going to get more firewood, she said. Stay put. I watched her disappear into the dark trees, her flashlight beam bouncing away until it vanished. I waited for the sound of twigs snapping, footsteps returning. None came. The minutes stretched into an hour. The fog returned thick and low, curling around the campsite like smoke. My chest grew tight. Something was wrong. I reached for my backpack and realized my inhaler compass and food bag were gone. Panic flared hot, then cold. I called out her name once, twice louder each time, but the forest swallowed it whole. Then through the mist, a flicker of movement. Not Vanessa, too low, too heavy. The rustle of fur, a grunt, the unmistakable musk of something wild. Bears. Real close. I backed toward the fire, heart slamming. My mind raced. If she'd left, why take everything? Why leave me defenseless? Then I saw it, a shape at the edge of the trees, faint but unmistakable. The taillights of our Jeep glowing red for a heartbeat before disappearing down the dirt road. My stomach dropped. My daughter hadn't gone for wood. She'd gone for good. Vanessa! I screamed, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice fading into the cold. In that moment, a part of me died, but another part woke up, the one that refused to die quietly. When the roar of the engine faded into the distance, I knew it wasn't a mistake. She wasn't coming back. I stood there under the weight of that silence, my breath fogging in the cold air, my fingers numb and shaking. Around me, the forest shifted and sighed, the kind of sound that makes you feel like you're being watched. My daughter had left me with nothing but a dying fire and the clothes on my back. The realization hit slowly like ice spreading through my veins. I called her name again, quieter this time, as if lowering my voice would change what had already happened. Vanessa. The wind answered. I moved toward the edge of the campsite where her tire tracks carved deep lines into the mud. My knees gave way, and I sank into them, pressing my palm against the cold earth. God, what did I do? I whispered. The question wasn't new. It had haunted me for years, every time she raised her voice, every time I cleaned up her messes, every time I turned a blind eye to her cruelty because she was just hurting. But this wasn't hurt. This was calculation. She had planned it, every detail, from the cheerful phone calls to the gear she insisted on packing herself. I looked around, forcing my nurse's mind to take over. Panic could kill faster than exposure. Inventory, one jacket, wool hat, scarf, gloves, no water, no food, no map, no lighter. I scanned the ground. The mirror. My hand found it half buried near the fire pit, reflecting the weak daylight. A piece of the past, a piece of me she couldn't erase. All right, I murmured. Think, Lydia. Think. First step, stay warm. I gathered what was left of the firewood and coaxed a flame with the scraps of paper I found in my coat, the trail permit the corner of an old grocery receipt. The fire sputtered but held. I fed it small twigs, then larger branches, building it higher, stronger. The flames painted the trees in gold and shadow, and for a moment I felt less alone. But the forest never truly sleeps. A branch cracked to my left, slow, deliberate. My eyes darted toward the sound. I couldn't see anything, but instinct screamed that something out there could see me. I tightened my scarf and backed closer to the fire. You're okay, I told myself aloud. You've survived worse. But I hadn't. Not like this. The night crept in darker and colder. I wrapped my arms around my knees, rocking slightly, listening to every noise, every rustle, every gust of wind until they all blurred into one long whisper. When exhaustion finally came, it wasn't sleep. It was a kind of blackout, shallow and restless. I woke to frost on my eyelashes and the sound of something breathing. Heavy. Close. My pulse spiked. I turned slowly. 10 feet away, a shadow moved between the trees. Massive shoulders, a low huff. A bear. My heart stuttered, but training kicked in. Don't run. Don't scream. Make yourself big. I rose, waving my arms slowly, voice trembling but firm. Hey! Hey there, big one. Easy now. The bear paused, its black eyes catching the firelight like shards of obsidian. For a moment, I thought it might charge. Instead, it sniffed. The air grunted and turned away, disappearing into the dark. My knees nearly buckled from relief. When the adrenaline ebbed, I felt something else rage. Cold, sharp, electric. She had left me here for this. She had imagined this moment her mother torn apart or frozen stiff and felt nothing. No, not nothing. Satisfaction. My tears came hot and fast, but they didn't last. You think this is the end? Vanessa, I whispered to the emptiness. You've forgotten who raised you. The next hours blurred into motion. I gathered branches, wrapped my scarf tighter, and built a crude torch from a stick and a piece of cloth. I would move with the dawn. When morning came, the world was white and silent. Frost glazed every surface. I followed the tire tracks she left not toward safety but toward proof. Proof that she meant to kill me. A few miles in, I found the spot where she'd paused. There were footprints near the road, small and deep, where she must have stood watching, waiting to see if I'd follow. And something else, a half-buried scrap of paper wedged between rocks. I dug it out carefully. A printed map with a note scrawled on the corner in her handwriting, "Trail ends here. She won't make it past nightfall." My stomach turned. My hands shook, but my mind cleared like a knife cutting fog. This wasn't abandonment. It was premeditation. She wanted me gone for good. Maybe it was the insurance policy I hadn't told her about. Maybe the house she thought she'd inherit. Maybe pure hatred. But whatever her reason, she'd underestimated me. She'd forgotten that surviving wasn't something I learned. It was who I was. I folded the paper and tucked it into my coat. The anger inside me hardened into something useful purpose. You took everything I whispered, but you left me the truth. And the truth was enough to keep me alive. The sun never really rose that day. It simply pressed a dull gray light across the snow, the kind of light that makes everything look half dead. My body ached. My lips were split and dry, and the bitter air bit through every layer of clothing I had left. But pain was a language I understood. It meant I was still alive. I gathered what strength I had and started walking west toward the faint line of a ridgeline I'd seen on the ranger's map the day before. If my memory was right, a service road ran somewhere beyond it. One step at a time, I whispered the sound of my voice, keeping me sane. I followed the tire tracks Vanessa had left her betrayal carved into the snow like an open wound. Every few yards I saw pieces of debris, a torn wrapper, a glove, an old coffee cup. She hadn't even cared to hide her trail. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't live long enough to see it. The thought burned hotter than any fire could. Hours passed. My legs felt like lead. The cold clawed at my lungs. I stopped by a fallen log and checked my pockets again. Mirror, scarf, no food, no water. I sucked a handful of snow, the ice stinging my tongue, and forced myself to keep moving. Each breath came out in white bursts, each one shorter than the last. My thoughts drifted to her face that morning, how calm she'd looked, how rehearsed. I'd seen the same expression once before on a patient's son who'd unplugged his father's oxygen tank to steal his pain medication. Entitlement always had the same eyes, empty, confident, cruel. I stumbled on a patch of ice and went down hard, my knee screaming. For a moment, I stayed there, forehead pressed to the snow, and let the tears come. "You're not dying here," I said out loud. "You are not dying here!" The forest gave no answer, but a sudden sound cracked through the silence. A low hum, mechanical, faint, but real. I froze, straining to listen. It came again, engines. Not far. My heart kicked against my ribs. I waved the mirror in the air, angling it toward the sound, hoping for light, hoping someone would see. When the noise grew louder, I pushed forward, half limping, half running. Branches whipped my face, but I didn't care. I burst into a clearing and saw them 4 ATV riders in orange winter gear parked near a line of tracks. Relief hit so hard I nearly fell again. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking. They turned immediately. The lead rider, a man in his late 50s with a weathered face and steady eyes, jumped off his vehicle. "Ma'am, over here!" He sprinted toward me, pulling off his helmet. "Are you hurt? My daughter." "She left me," I stammered. "She took the car, the food, everything." His expression hardened. "She abandoned you out here," I nodded, unable to hold back the tremor in my voice. "Said the bears would take me." His jaw clenched. "Name's Noah Blake. I'm a ranger here. You're lucky we came through this route." He gestured to the others. "Get her water, quick." I drank greedily, the cold liquid burning down my throat, tasting like salvation. Noah crouched beside me. "How long ago did she leave yesterday morning?" I said. "I walked all night." He looked toward the direction I'd come from, calculating. "You're about 15 miles from the main road. She had to have taken it out already. You got any reason she'd do this?" I hesitated. Shame crept up my throat. Money. Maybe the house. Maybe just hate. Noah's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Then we'll make sure hate doesn't win." He helped me onto the back of his ATV. "Hold tight. We'll get you warm and safe. Then you can tell me everything." The ride back was a blur of motion and wind. The cold tore at my face, but it didn't matter anymore. I was alive, and every bump of the trail felt like proof of that. As the forest blurred past, I looked back over my shoulder at the wilderness that had nearly swallowed me whole. The same wilderness my daughter thought would become my grave. "You chose the wrong battlefield, Vanessa," I murmured. When we reached the ranger station, Noah guided me inside a cabin heated by a wood stove. The sudden warmth made me dizzy. He gave me a blanket and a steaming mug of tea. "You're safe now," he said, "but we need to report this. What she did. It's not just abandonment, it's attempted murder." The words landed heavy, but right. I pulled the folded scrap of paper from my coat and handed it to him. "She left this." His eyes scanned it, brows tightening. "Trail ends here. She won't make it past nightfall." He exhaled sharply. "Well, that settles intent." He turned toward his radio. "Anchorage PD owes me a favor." I stopped him. "Wait, I need one thing first." He looked at me cautious. "I need to face her, before you bring the law." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You sure you want that?" "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady now. "She thought she buried me out there. I want her to see what survived." By dusk, the storm clouds had cleared, revealing a sky of deep violet streaked with orange. I sat near the ranger station's window, watching snowmelt drip from the roof in slow, rhythmic beats. My body still trembled from the cold, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Noah was on the radio in the corner, his calm voice relaying coordinates, license plate numbers, and the make of a black Jeep Cherokee with Washington plates. "If she's heading south," he said into the receiver, "she'll hit Anchorage before midnight." Then he turned toward me. "She's not getting far. We've got patrols watching both exits." I nodded, clutching the cup of tea between my palms. "Good," I said, "but I don't want her caught yet, not until I'm there." He studied me quietly. "You want to confront her yourself?" "I need to," I said simply. "If I don't face her, she'll own the story. She'll twist it like she's twisted everything else." Noah leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You've got grit, Lydia. But this could get ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "I just want the truth to see daylight." He nodded slowly, then handed me a set of dry clothes and a coat. "All right, let's give her the daylight she's earned." 3 hours later, we arrived at a small roadside motel on the outskirts of Anchorage. The neon sign buzzed like a dying insect, casting red light across the snow. Noah parked the ranger truck behind the building where we could see the lot without being seen. And there she was, the black Jeep, parked crookedly, dusted with ice. Vanessa had beaten us there by minutes. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. She'd made it this far, probably believing her plan had worked. She must have spent the day picturing my frozen body under a blanket of snow. I could almost hear her rehearsing her performance, the grieving daughter, the tears, the call to the insurance office. "You ready?" Noah asked. I nodded. My fingers trembled as I unzipped my coat pocket and pulled out the folded note she'd written, the one I'd found on the trail. I could barely read the words now through the creases, but they were burned into my mind. She won't make it past nightfall. Noah slipped a small recorder into my jacket pocket. "Keep it running," he said. "If she talks, we'll have it on tape. If things go sideways, I'm 30 seconds behind you." I met his gaze. "I've faced death before," I said quietly, "but never like this." Then I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The motel office smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. Vanessa stood at the counter, her hair pulled back, her coat spotless, her face composed. She looked almost peaceful, like a woman whose problems had finally solved themselves. "Vanessa," I said. Her entire body went rigid. Slowly she turned. Her eyes widened first in disbelief, then in terror. "Mom," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." I took a step closer, my boots echoing on the tile. "Surprised to see me? You said I wouldn't make it past nightfall." She backed up, bumping into the counter. "Mom, please, it's not—" "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," I said. "You brought me there to die." Her mouth opened and closed like she was drowning on dry land. I panicked. I didn't mean to. I cut her off. You planned it, Vanessa. You chose that trail. You packed the car. You took my supplies. You left me with nothing but a prayer and a bear's shadow." Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. "We can talk about this." "No," I said. "We're past talking." I took the note from my coat and dropped it on the counter between us. "You recognize that?" Her face drained of color. "Where did you—" "You left it behind. Like breadcrumbs." I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. "You wanted me dead, but all you did was prove that you never learned the one thing I tried to teach you your whole life how to survive." She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door. "You don't know what it's like," she said, suddenly her voice breaking. "You controlled everything, every dollar, every choice. You made me weak." "No," I said. "You chose to be weak." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy as stone. Then Noah stepped inside Badge, glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Vanessa Carter," he said evenly. "I'm Ranger Noah Blake. You're under investigation for attempted murder." Her head snapped toward him, eyes wild. "What?" "No. She's lying." Noah reached into his coat, pulling out a small device. "We have your note. We have your vehicle, your abandoned gear, and your mother's statement. And we have this." He tapped my jacket pocket where the recorder blinked red. "Everything you just said is on record." For a heartbeat, Vanessa just stared at me as if searching for the girl she used to be, the one who trusted me to braid her hair to chase away monsters under the bed. But the woman who stood before me wasn't that girl anymore. "You should have stayed gone," she hissed. "Then at least I'd have something to show for all those years you stole from me." I met her gaze steadily. "I didn't steal your years, Vanessa. I gave you mine." When Noah read her rights, she didn't resist. She just stared at me with eyes that looked more hollow than hateful. The red and blue lights of the patrol car reflected across the snow as they led her away. For a long time, I stood there watching, not out of vengeance, but of mourning for the daughter I lost long before that forest ever took her. Noah stepped beside me, his breath visible in the cold air. "You all right?" he asked softly. I nodded slowly. "I am now." She thought she left me to die, but she just made me remember how to live. The Anchorage police station buzzed with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the faint crackle of radios. I sat across from Detective Maria Stanton, a woman with sharp eyes and the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too much. On the table between us lay the note, the recording, and Noah's signed report. Maria clicked her pen twice, studying me. "Ms. Carter, I've handled wilderness crimes for 20 years, she said. "But this is one of the most deliberate I've ever seen." Her voice was steady, but I could see the unease beneath it, the disbelief that a daughter could orchestrate something so cold. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee. She always knew how to plan, I said softly. She just never knew how to love. Maria nodded slowly. Your ranger friend did good work. We've got her confession, the abandoned campsite, and the evidence trail. That note alone, she tapped the paper. It's a prosecutor's dream. She paused. Do you want to be present when we charge her? The question hit harder than I expected. My instinct said no, but another part of me, the part that had walked barefoot through frozen soil to survive, needed to see it through. Yes, I said finally. If I can survive her leaving me to die, I can survive hearing her answer for it. Later that afternoon, they brought Vanessa into the interview room. Her wrists were cuffed, her face pale and puffy from crying. For the first time in years, she looked small. The arrogance, the sharp tongue, the practiced manipulation, they were gone. What remained was a trembling shadow of the woman who once called me Mama. She wouldn't look at me at first. Vanessa Carter. The detective began, her voice clipped and formal. You are being charged with attempted murder in the first-degree conspiracy to commit fraud and reckless endangerment. Do you understand these charges? Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. Maria slid the note across the table. You wrote this? Silence. Ms. Carter, Maria said again, firmer. Vanessa's jaw trembled. I don't remember. I leaned forward slightly. Then let me help you, I said quietly. It says, she won't make it past nightfall. That's your handwriting. You left it on the trail right before you drove away. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time I saw something raw, fear, maybe even guilt. You don't understand, she said, voice cracking. You made me feel trapped, Mom. My whole life you made me feel like I was nothing without you. My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. And your answer was to make me nothing at all. Tears welled in her eyes, but no apology came. Just silence, thick and suffocating. Maria broke it with a sigh. That's enough for now. She turned to me. We'll move forward with arraignment in the morning. Given her intent and the premeditation, the DA will seek maximum sentencing. 15 to 25 years. I nodded numb. Numbers didn't comfort me. Justice wasn't measured in years, it was measured in clarity. And clarity, I'd learned, could be as painful as frostbite. When they led Vanessa out, she turned her head one last time. You always wanted control, she whispered, her voice almost tender. Now you have it. I didn't respond, because she was wrong again. This wasn't control, it was consequence. After she was gone, Maria placed a small envelope on the table. We found this in her Jeep, she said. You might want to see it before it becomes evidence. Inside was a letter addressed to me in her looping handwriting. The ink was smudged as if written in a hurry. Mom, if you're reading this, it means the plan didn't go the way I thought. I told myself it was about freedom, about finally being out from under you, but that's not true. It was about hate for the version of me that could never measure up. I wanted to kill that version, but I aimed at you instead. Maybe now you'll finally live for yourself instead of for me. The letter ended there unfinished, like she'd run out of courage, or maybe out of excuses. I folded it carefully, not out of forgiveness, but out of respect for the truth it finally revealed. When I stepped outside, the sun was setting behind the Chugach Mountains, casting long orange ribbons across the snow. Noah waited by the truck hands in his coat pockets. It's done, he asked. It's begun, I said quietly. He studied me for a moment, then handed me an envelope of his own. You might need this. Court papers, your statement. Everything tied up in a bow. I took it and smiled faintly. You make a good partner, Ranger. He chuckled. And you make one hell of a survivor, Ms. Carter. As we drove back toward town, the radio hummed softly. I watched the road unwind through the windshield, thinking of all the nights I'd prayed for my daughter to come home safe, to make better choices, to find her heart again. But somewhere along the line, she'd traded it for ambition and resentment. And maybe I'd helped her do it by mistaking sacrifice for love duty, for closeness. Noah dropped me off at the small cabin the station had arranged. Before he left, he said, You should write this down someday. People forget that survival isn't luck, it's will. I watched his truck disappear into the trees, the taillights fading like distant stars. Inside, I sat by the wood stove, the fire snapping softly, and pulled out a notebook from my pack. The first page was blank waiting. I wrote 3 words, I am alive. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for it. The trial came 6 months later. Anchorage in late autumn was all silver skies and thin daylight, the kind that barely touched the ground before fading away. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, their breath visible in the cold. I walked past them in a navy coat and wool gloves, every step measured my cane, tapping the stone like a metronome. I'd told myself I wouldn't look at Vanessa when they brought her in, but when the courtroom doors opened and she entered in that orange prison jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, I couldn't help it. Her hair was shorter, her eyes sunken, but she still carried that same air of quiet defiance. She didn't look at me at first, only at the floor. Maybe shame was too heavy to lift. The prosecutor began with simple words. "This is not a case of misunderstanding or panic. This is a case of intention." His voice echoed through the chamber. Ms. Carter brought her mother Lydia to the remote Alaskan wilderness. She deprived her of food, water, and communication, knowing full well that exposure or wildlife would finish the job. He lifted the note sealed in plastic, and she left this message handwritten in her own words. "She won't make it past nightfall." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Vanessa's defense attorney objected, of course, claimed the note was taken out of context, that it was an expression of frustration, not intent. But the recording, the ranger's testimony, the timeline, everything pointed to one truth. She had wanted me dead. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly, my knees stiff but steady. The courtroom seemed to fade until only her face remained in focus. I spent 38 years as a nurse. I began. I've seen every kind of wound, some from accident, some from cruelty, but none as deep as the one caused by betrayal. My voice wavered, but I didn't stop. My daughter wasn't born evil. She was born loved. Somewhere along the way, love turned into dependence, and dependence turned into hate. I gave until I disappeared, and when I was gone, she decided to make it permanent. Vanessa's jaw trembled, and for a second she almost looked human again. I finished quietly, but she forgot one thing. I taught her how to survive, and I remembered it better than she did. When I stepped down from the stand, the silence was absolute. Even the judge looked shaken. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, 22 years in a federal penitentiary for attempted murder and fraud. No parole for 12. As the words rang out, Vanessa finally looked at me. Not with hate, not even with regret, just emptiness. Like a mirror with no reflection left. She mouthed something, why, but I didn't answer. Because she already knew. After the sentencing, Noah found me outside the courthouse steps, the cold wind whipping his ranger hat. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. I exhaled slowly, watching the breath vanish into the air. "Justice doesn't feel the way you think it will. It's quieter, colder." He nodded. "It's still justice." I gave him a tired smile. "Yes, it is." Over the next few weeks, I stayed in Anchorage to settle legal matters. The DA's office helped me file restraining orders, close the estate transfers Vanessa had forged, and redirect all assets into a charitable trust. I named it the Carter Fund for Resilience, a scholarship for single mothers in nursing programs. Every dollar she tried to steal would go toward helping women who refused to quit. The irony was almost poetic. When the paperwork was done, I drove north with Noah to Denali one last time. The air was sharp and clean, the snow melting into patches of emerald moss. We stopped near the same trailhead where it all began. My breath caught as I saw the clearing again, the blackened circle of the old fire pit, the faint imprint of tire tracks long covered by time. Noah stood beside me. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "I need to leave it here, the fear, the anger, all of it." From my coat, I pulled the mirror I'd kept since that night, the one thing I'd carried through the dark. Its surface was scratched, but it still caught the light. I knelt, set it down beside the ashes, and whispered, "You didn't kill me, Vanessa. You reminded me who I was before I forgot." The wind stirred, scattering the ash like dusted snow. I stood feeling lighter somehow, the ache in my chest replaced by something gentler, peace maybe, or acceptance. Noah smiled faintly. "You ever think you might write all this down? Could help people." I looked out toward the horizon where the mountains caught the sunlight like fire. "Maybe I already am," I said. He laughed softly. "Well, when you do, you know I'll read it." We walked back to the truck in silence. Before getting in, I took one last look at the forest, quiet, unbroken, eternal. It no longer felt like a place of death. It felt like truth. As we drove away, I thought of something my husband Charles once told me after his last deployment. Survival isn't winning. It's choosing to keep living after you've lost. Now at 63, I finally understood what he meant. The forest hadn't destroyed me. My daughter hadn't ended me. They'd stripped me bare until only the core remained, and that was enough. Back home in Seattle, the rain felt different. Not heavy or punishing, but cleansing. It was the first time in years I walked into my house and didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against my ribs. The place was quiet, but not lonely. The walls, the framed photos, even the faded curtains, everything seemed to exhale with me, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years. I put on a pot of coffee, my first small ritual of peace, and sat by the window that looked out over the little garden Charles had planted decades ago. The hydrangeas had gone wild in my absence, but I didn't mind. Nature didn't need permission to thrive again, and neither did I. I spent the first few weeks rebuilding things, not just furniture or finances, but routines. I went back to volunteering at the community clinic downtown. The younger nurses were surprised to see me. "Ms. Carter, we thought you retired for good," one of them said, smiling. "I did," I replied, tightening the strap of my mask, "but sometimes life retires you before you're ready. I guess I still have something left to give." They didn't need to know the details. No one did. The scars of betrayal don't need to be worn on your sleeve. Sometimes the quiet ones heal best. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket and a mug of tea listening to the rain. I still thought about her, Vanessa. My daughter. My mistake. My miracle. Some nights, I'd replay her words in that motel lobby, the venom, the hurt, the desperation. Other nights, I'd remember her laughter as a child, how she used to sing to herself in the bathtub, or how she'd run into my arms when thunder scared her. Two people, same face. It's a hard thing to reconcile that the one you'd die for can also be the one who wants you dead. One morning, about a month after the trial, I received a letter from the correctional facility. My first instinct was to throw it away, but my hands wouldn't let me. I opened it carefully, the paper trembling between my fingers. "Mom, they say therapy is supposed to help, but it just makes me remember. I don't sleep much. I see your face when I close my eyes, not the one in court, but the one by the fire, when I thought I could still change my mind. I don't know what made me do it. Anger, pride. Maybe both. But I need you to know something. I never hated you for being strong. I hated you for showing me how weak I'd become. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see it now. I see me." I read it twice, maybe 3 times. My hands were cold by the time I folded it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just whispered, "You're still alive." That's enough. Then I placed the letter in the same box that held Charles's wedding ring and my nursing pins, the things that mattered not because they were perfect, but because they survived imperfection. Weeks passed. The scholarship foundation started to grow faster than I'd imagined. Donations came in from hospital colleagues, veterans, even anonymous supporters who'd read about the case in local papers. We named our first 3 recipients that spring, all single mothers pursuing nursing degrees, all determined to build a better life. When I met them at the award luncheon, one of them, a young woman with braids and steady eyes, hugged me and said, "Thank you for believing women like us still matter." I smiled and told her, "You already mattered. You just needed someone to remind you." Noah called occasionally from Alaska. He'd send pictures of Denali in the summer green valleys, bright rivers, clear skies. "Still quiet up here," he'd say over the phone. "No more Carters causing trouble." I'd laugh softly and tell him, "Good. The bears deserve a break." He became more than a friend. He became the anchor I didn't realize I needed. Not romantic, not dramatic, just steady like mountain roots under the snow. One evening, he sent a photo of a sunrise over Bear Creek Pass where it had all happened. The caption read, "Looks different when you survive it, doesn't it?" I stared at the image for a long time before replying, "It's not a place of death anymore. It's a place of becoming." As the months rolled into a year, I began writing not a memoir, not exactly, but pieces of it. Reflections on survival, on motherhood, on how love without boundaries turns into captivity. I called the manuscript "The Distance Between Breath and Betrayal." Maybe one day I'd publish it. Maybe not. For now, it was enough to write to give shape to pain so it wouldn't eat me alive from the inside. Every anniversary of that day, I light a candle in the garden. Not for Vanessa, not for forgiveness, but for clarity, the light that keeps me from ever walking blind again. Sometimes neighbors stop by to talk, bringing pie or questions about flowers. They don't see a survivor of attempted murder. They just see an older woman with kind eyes and steady hands. And I'm fine with that. You don't have to tell the world what you've endured to know who you are. As the candle flickers in the dark, I whisper the same words I spoke the night I made it out of the forest. I am alive. And each year it sounds less like defiance and more like peace. Because surviving isn't about defeating someone else, it's about reclaiming yourself. And in the quiet of my little home with the rain tapping against the glass and the world still turning, I finally understood the truest thing of all. Sometimes the people who abandon you into the wilderness teach you how to find your way home. A year later, I found myself back in Alaska, not to relive what happened, but to reclaim it. The state had invited me to speak at a wilderness safety conference, an irony that made both Noah and me laugh. The auditorium was filled with rangers, hikers, teachers, and families who wanted to understand how survival was more than skill, it was choice. When they introduced me, the applause felt unreal. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out across the sea of faces, all of them strangers yet somehow familiar, because every one of them had survived something: grief, loss, betrayal, regret. My name is Lydia Carter. I began, my voice steady, carrying through the hall. And I am here because someone I love left me to die. You could hear the air, still like the room itself was holding its breath. But I'm not here to tell you about pain, I continued. I'm here to tell you about clarity, about how sometimes when everything you built is burned to ash, you can finally see what's real underneath. I told them about the silence of the forest, about hearing my own heartbeat and realizing it was still fighting about finding help and then finding purpose. You don't survive because you're unbreakable, I said. You survive because you're willing to rebuild. When I finished, the crowd rose in quiet applause, not roaring, but thoughtful. People came up after to thank me, to share their own stories. A woman who escaped an abusive marriage, a father who lost his son to addiction, a young ranger who'd nearly died rescuing a stranded hiker. Pain, it seemed, was universal, but so was endurance. Noah found me afterward near the coffee station holding 2 paper cups. You did good, Carter, he said. You gave them more than advice. You gave them hope. I smiled faintly. Hope's just the spark. Survival's the fire. He nodded, and you've still got plenty of it. We walked outside the sky, painted with streaks of gold and lilac. The air smelled clean, like forgiveness. Snowmelt trickled down the edges of the path, the sound soft as breath. I closed my eyes and listened. For once, the wilderness didn't echo with memory, it simply existed calm and indifferent. And I was fine with that. Before leaving Alaska, I visited the ranger station one last time. The staff had framed a photo of the Bear Creek Rescue Team, including Noah, with a small brass plaque that read, "Survival through Solidarity." My name wasn't on it, but I didn't need it there. The photo alone said enough. We endure when we stop being alone in our fight. That night in my hotel room, I reread Vanessa's last letter. She'd written again from prison, shorter this time, less confession, more reflection. Mom, they've moved me to a work detail. It's hard labor, but it clears my head. Sometimes when I'm out under the open sky, I think about Alaska, not the fear, but the stillness. I know you'll never visit me, and I don't blame you, but I want you to know I'm trying to find what you've found. I'm trying to survive myself. I folded it and placed it back in my notebook between the pages of The Distance Between Breath and Betrayal. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but I understood her now the way you understand a scar. You stop wishing it gone and start learning how to live with the mark it leaves. When I returned home, I hosted the first annual fundraiser for the Carter Fund for Resilience. The small community hall filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of jazz playing from a live band. The scholarship recipients spoke, each one standing taller than the last. "This fund changed my life," one said through tears. "It gave me a future my past tried to take away." I smiled from my seat fingers, brushing the gold chain around my neck, the same one I'd worn the day Vanessa left me in the snow. It no longer felt like a weight. It felt like proof. As the evening ended, I walked outside into the cool Seattle night. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets shining under the lamplight. Across the sky, the first stars blinked through the thinning clouds. I thought about how easily life can fracture and how quietly it can mend. If anyone had told me 2 years ago that I'd find peace after betrayal, I would have laughed. But peace isn't what you find. It's what you build one breath, one choice, one truth at a time. So if you're watching this right now, if someone you love has broken you, left you stranded, or made you believe you're unworthy of survival, hear me when I say this. You are still here, and that means the story isn't over. I know, because mine wasn't. Now I wake each morning and whisper the same words I carried out of that forest: I am alive. And every time I say them, they sound less like a declaration and more like a prayer of gratitude. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments, what's the hardest thing you've survived and what did it teach you about yourself? If this story touched you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear that survival isn't weakness, it's strength in motion. Because sometimes the wilderness that tries to kill you ends up teaching you how to live.